Willa Sinclair froze in the storm-sheltered doorway, rain soaking through her shawl as she stared at the man she'd sheltered 3 months ago. The stranger who'd said nothing but thank you and disappeared before dawn. He stood on her porch now, with a deputy's badge gleaming on his vest and a foreclosure notice folded in his gloved hand. The wind tore at her braid and sent the cedar trees into wild motion. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because Micah Turner had come back. And this time, he wasn't asking for shelter. He was here to take everything she had left. He pulled his hat lower against the rain, jaw tight beneath the stubble. "Deputy Turner, ma'am. I need to deliver this to the owner of Bluebird Ranch." His voice was rough, careful, like he was handling something that might shatter. Willa's fingers clenched the doorframe. She felt the splinters dig into her palm. "I'm the owner." She saw his eyes narrow, saw the muscle jump in his cheek. He hadn't known. "The bank sent you." It wasn't a question. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, and held out the folded paper. She didn't take it. "You have 72 hours to settle the debt or vacate the property." The rain fell harder now, drumming on the porch roof, drowning out everything but the thunder rolling in from the west. Willa stepped out into the weather, let the cold soak her to the skin. "This ranch has been in my family for 20 years. My father built every fence post." She heard her voice crack and hated it. Hated the way Micah's gaze softened just enough to make her chest ache. He didn't lower the paper. "I'm sorry. The law doesn't care about fence posts." She wanted to slap him. She wanted to ask why he'd stayed in Cedar Mesa, why he'd taken a badge, why he hadn't warned her when he must have known this was coming. Instead, she snatched the notice from his hand and turned her back. "Get off my land." He didn't move. Willa could feel him standing there, silent and immovable as the storm battered them both. "Miss Sinclair." She spun around, fury lighting her from the inside. "It's Miss Sinclair now?" "3 months ago you called me Willa, when I gave you half my supper and didn't ask what you were running from." His jaw clenched. "I wasn't running." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You had blood on your shirt and a bullet graze on your shoulder. Don't insult me by pretending you weren't running." The rain slicked his hair to his forehead, made his eyes look darker, more dangerous. "What I was doing then doesn't change what I have to do now." Willa felt the notice grow heavy in her hand, felt the ink start to blur under the rain. 72 hours. She had $300 in the lockbox under her bed. The bank wanted $2,000. She could sell every horse, every tool, every piece of furniture her mother had loved, and she still wouldn't have enough. Her breath came shallow and fast. "Why you?" Cedar Mesa had a sheriff, an old man named Bowman, who moved slow and looked the other way when convenient. Why send a deputy she'd never seen before to deliver the death blow to her family's legacy? Micah finally dropped his hand. "Sheriff Bowman sent me because the bank requested someone who wouldn't hesitate." His voice was flat now, emptied of everything but duty. "They know you grew up here. They know people might sympathize. They wanted someone with no ties." Willa felt something cold settle in her chest. "And you have no ties." He met her eyes, and for just a moment she saw something flicker there, something raw and unguarded. Then it was gone. "No, ma'am, I don't." The rain turned to hail, small and vicious, bouncing off the porch boards. Willa pulled her shawl tighter and walked past him into the house, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. She stood in the dim front room, water pooling at her feet, and stared at the notice in her trembling hands. Payment in full or immediate vacate. Signed by the Cedar Mesa First Bank. Countersigned by Sheriff Bowman. Witnessed by Deputy Micah Turner. She wanted to scream. She wanted to burn it. Instead, she carefully unfolded the paper and read every word twice, looking for a loophole, a mistake, anything that might buy her time. There was nothing. The debt was clear. The deadline was clear. The consequences were clear. She was going to lose Bluebird Ranch, and the man who'd once looked at her like she was mercy itself was the one delivering her sentence. The hail stopped as suddenly as it started. Willa heard his boots on the porch, heard him hesitate, heard him finally walk away. She moved to the window and watched him mount a gray gelding she didn't recognize. Watched him ride toward town with his shoulders hunched against the wind. He didn't look back. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let herself shake. Her father had died 2 years ago. Her mother, 6 months after that. The ranch was all she had left, the only proof they'd ever existed, ever mattered. And now, it was being taken by a bank that didn't care, and delivered by a man who owed her his life. Willa stripped off her wet clothes and wrapped herself in a quilt her mother had stitched, then sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of her. She'd been keeping the ranch books since she was 16, had taken over completely after her father's heart gave out in the north pasture. She knew every number, every expense, every slim margin. The drought last summer had killed half the herd. The winter had been brutal. She'd borrowed from the bank in March to buy seed and pay the hands. She'd planned to repay it after the fall cattle sale, but the sale had been canceled when fever swept through the stockyards in Dodge City, and the bank had called the note due. 72 hours. She ran her finger down the columns, adding and subtracting, and came up $300 short every time. There was a knock at the door just after nightfall. Willa pulled a shawl over her dry blouse and opened it to find Mary Callahan, the preacher's wife, standing on the porch with a basket covered in cloth. "Oh, Willa," I heard. Mary's face was soft with pity, and Willa hated it. "Heard what?" "That the bank's foreclosing, dear. The whole town knows." Of course they did. Cedar Mesa was small enough that a secret lasted about as long as a match in a windstorm. Willa took the basket because refusing would make things worse. "Thank you." Mary hesitated, glancing back toward the road. "There's talk." Willa's stomach tightened. "What kind of talk?" Mary lowered her voice. "About you and the new deputy. People saw him ride out here alone. They saw you two standing in the rain, close, arguing like, well." She trailed off, but Willa understood. Like lovers, like people with history. She felt heat rise in her face. Deputy Turner came to deliver a legal notice. That's all. Mary's expression said she wanted to believe it, but didn't quite manage. "I'm sure that's true, dear. But you know how people are. A single woman and a single man. Especially one as, well, as striking as Deputy Turner." Willa forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "I appreciate the concern. And the food." She closed the door before Mary could say anything else. She set the basket on the counter and went back to the ledger. The numbers didn't change. She thought about selling her mother's jewelry, the small pearl brooch, and the gold locket. But they'd bring maybe $50, maybe less. She thought about going to the neighboring ranchers, asking for a loan, but they were all struggling too. And besides, pride was a weed that grew deep. She thought about Micah Turner's face in the rain, the way his hand had stayed extended even after she'd taken the notice, like he wanted to say something more, but couldn't let himself. She thought about the blood on his shirt 3 months ago, the way he'd gripped his shoulder and refused to meet her eyes when she'd asked what happened. The lamp flickered. Willa closed the ledger and stood, pacing the small kitchen. There had to be a way. There was always a way if you were willing to pay the price. Her father used to say that, back when he still believed hard work and honesty could win against bad luck and worse men. She moved to the window and stared out at the dark shape of the barn, the corrals, the land that rolled away toward the distant mesa. Bluebird Ranch. Her father had named it after her mother's favorite bird, the mountain bluebird that nested in the cottonwoods every spring. Willa hadn't seen one in 2 years. Maybe they knew something she didn't. She was still standing there when she heard the horse. Hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, coming up the long drive. Willa's pulse kicked. It was full dark now. No moon, just starlight struggling through the last of the storm clouds. No honest man rode alone to a woman's ranch after nightfall. She moved away from the window, grabbed the shotgun her father had kept by the door, and checked the loads. Both barrels ready. She waited, counting breaths, until the rider stopped outside. Then came the knock. Willa opened the door just wide enough to show the barrel. "State your business." Micah Turner stood in the starlight, hat in hand, no weapon drawn. His face was shadowed, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders were tight as fence wire. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About the foreclosure. About why I'm really in Cedar Mesa." Willa's finger hovered near the trigger. She wanted to slam the door. She wanted to shoot him. She wanted to know what he meant by really. She lowered the shotgun an inch. "You have 1 minute." He glanced past her into the house, then back at her face. "Can I come in?" "No." "Talk from there." Micah set his hat on the porch rail and ran a hand through his hair. 3 months ago, I wasn't running from the law. I was running toward it. Willa's breath caught. She waited. He continued, voice low and rough. "I witnessed a murder in Dodge City. A man named Coltrane, a cattle broker with ties to half the banks in Kansas, shot a rancher over a disputed contract. I saw it happen. I testified. Coltrane's men have been hunting me since." Willa's hands tightened on the shotgun. "So you came here?" He nodded. "Sheriff Bowman knew my situation. He offered me a deputy post and protection if I kept my head down and did the job. I took it because I didn't have a choice. The pieces fell into place, cold and sharp. And the job is enforcing foreclosures for the bank." Micah's jaw clenched. Among other things, Willa felt her anger return, hot and vicious. "So you sold out. You traded your integrity for a badge and a safe place to hide." His eyes snapped to hers, and for the first time she saw real heat there, real pain. "I traded my life for a chance to stay alive long enough to see Coltrane hang. He goes to trial in 3 weeks. Until then, I do what Bowman tells me, or he withdraws his protection and I'm a dead man." Willa's chest ached. She wanted to feel sorry for him. She couldn't. That doesn't change the fact that you're taking my ranch. I know. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 months ago. I came here to tell you that I'll buy you more time if I can. How? He hesitated. There's a clause in the foreclosure order. If you can demonstrate a significant change in financial circumstance, the bank has to extend the deadline by 30 days. Willa's heart pounded. What kind of change? Marriage. Her breath stopped. Micah continued, his voice careful and deliberate. If you marry before the 72 hours are up, the bank has to treat the debt as a joint obligation and allow time for the new household to arrange payment. Willa stared at him. You're insane. He didn't flinch. I'm desperate. So are you. She laughed. A sound with no humor in it. You want me to marry a stranger to save my ranch? You're not a stranger. You sheltered me when you didn't have to. You didn't ask questions. You gave me food and a place to sleep, and you didn't tell anyone I was here. He took another step, and now he was close enough that she could smell the rain still clinging to his duster, the faint scent of gun oil and leather. I owe you. Let me pay it back. Willa's hands shook. This is madness. He nodded slowly. Yes. But it's also the only way you keep Bluebird Ranch. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him to get off her land and never come back. But the ledger was still open on her kitchen table. The numbers still brutal and unforgiving. And 72 hours was not enough time to work a miracle. Willa looked at Micah Turner, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd chosen to testify when he could have walked away, who'd spent 3 months looking over his shoulder, who was offering her the only lifeline he had. It wasn't love. It wasn't even trust. But it was something. Why would you do this? His eyes held hers. Because I remember what it's like to lose everything. Because you helped me when I had nothing. Because I can't watch the bank take this place and know I had a way to stop it. Willa lowered the shotgun completely. If we did this, it would be a business arrangement. Nothing more. He nodded. Nothing more. I'd stay in the barn or the bunkhouse. I'd help with the ranch work. When Coltrane's trial is over and I can leave Cedar Mesa safely, we dissolve the marriage, and you keep the property. She felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The whole town would talk. They're already talking. He said it flat and certain. Mary Callahan made sure of that. If we marry, at least we give them a reason that makes sense. Willa closed her eyes. Her mother would have called this reckless. Her father would have called it desperate. She called it the only choice that didn't end with her homeless and broken. When do we do it? Micah's shoulders relaxed just slightly. Tomorrow morning. I'll arrange it with Reverend Callahan. Willa opened her eyes. His wife already thinks we're carrying on. He might refuse. Micah's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He won't refuse if the sheriff asks him. And Bowman owes me. Willa nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. She held out her hand, formal and cold. Micah took it. His palm was rough and warm, his grip solid. For just a moment they stood there, hands locked, and Willa felt something shift in the air between them. something that had nothing to do with business arrangements and everything to do with the way he'd looked at her in the rain, the way she'd thought about him every day since he'd disappeared. She pulled her hand back. Tomorrow morning, then. He put his hat back on, tugged the brim. Tomorrow morning. He turned and walked back to his horse, swung into the saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. Willa watched him ride away, then closed the door and leaned against it, shotgun still in her hands. She'd just agreed to marry a man she barely knew, a man with a target on his back and a badge he didn't want, a man who'd come to take her ranch and ended up offering to save it instead. She didn't know if that made him a fool or a saint. She suspected it made him both. Sleep didn't come easy. Willa lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as clouds moved across the stars. She thought about her parents, about what they would say if they knew. Her father had been a practical man. He would have understood. Her mother had been a romantic. She would have wept. Willa felt caught between the two, between the cold logic of survival and the aching wish that this was something more than a calculated trade. She turned on her side and pulled the quilt tighter. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Micah Turner. Tomorrow, the foreclosure would be delayed. Tomorrow, she would have 30 days to figure out how to pay a debt she couldn't afford, and protect a man she didn't trust, and keep a ranch that was slowly killing her. Morning came pale and cold. Willa rose before dawn, washed in the basin, and put on the only dress she owned that wasn't work-stained or torn. It was dark blue wool, high-necked and long-sleeved, the dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral. She braided her hair carefully, pinned it up, and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked tired. She looked scared. She looked like a woman about to make a mistake she couldn't undo. She turned away from the mirror and went to feed the horses. Micah arrived just after sunrise, riding the gray gelding and leading a second horse, a sturdy bay mare. He dismounted and tied both animals to the porch rail. Willa came out of the barn, brushing hay from her skirt. You didn't have to bring a horse. He glanced at the bay. You'll need one to ride into town, unless you'd rather we both ride the gray. She flushed. The bay is fine. He nodded and waited while she finished in the barn, then helped her into the saddle. His hands were steady on her waist, impersonal and careful. Willa settled into the seat and took the reins. They rode toward Cedar Mesa in silence, the morning air cold enough to burn her lungs. The town was waking as they arrived. Willa saw curtains twitch in windows, saw faces turn to watch as they rode down the main street toward the white church at the end. Her stomach churned. By noon, everyone would know. By evening, the stories would be half fiction and twice as scandalous. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward. Micah rode beside her, solid and silent, and she took an odd comfort in his presence. He'd offered her this. He'd pay the price of the gossip, too. They dismounted at the church steps. Reverend Callahan was waiting, his face carefully neutral. Mary stood behind him, eyes wide and hungry for details. Reverend. Micah's voice was respectful but firm. We'd like you to perform a marriage. This morning. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. This morning? Yes, sir. Willa stepped forward. We have our reasons, Reverend Callahan. I'm sure we don't need to explain them. Mary made a small sound, quickly covered. The Reverend looked between them, measuring, weighing. Sheriff Bowman spoke to me last night. He said you'd be coming. He said this was a matter of some urgency. Micah nodded. It is. The Reverend sighed. Very well. Come inside. The church was dim and cold, smelling of old wood and candle wax. Willa walked down the aisle with Micah beside her, their footsteps echoing. The Reverend took his place at the front and opened his Bible. Mary sat in the first pew, a witness whether they wanted one or not. The Reverend began the service, his voice steady and formal. Willa barely heard the words. She was too focused on Micah's hand, rough and warm, holding hers. Too focused on the way his thumb brushed her knuckles once, quick and light. Like a question. She didn't pull away. Do you, Micah Turner, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was low and clear. Do you, Willa Sinclair, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Willa swallowed hard. I do. The Reverend nodded. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Kansas, I pronounce you man and wife. He closed the Bible. You may kiss the bride. Willa's heart stopped. She hadn't thought about this part. Micah turned to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, soft and brief. And then he stepped away. It was nothing. It was everything. Willa felt her knees go weak. They signed the register. Mary signed as witness, her hands shaking with barely contained excitement. The Reverend handed Micah a folded certificate. Congratulations. His tone said he didn't believe this was a love match, but he wasn't going to argue. Micah tucked the certificate into his vest. Thank you, Reverend. Willa managed to nod and turned to leave. Mary caught her arm at the door. Willa, dear, are you sure about this? Willa looked her in the eye. I'm sure. Mary's smile was thin. Well, I hope you'll both be very happy. The words were right. The tone was poison. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Willa's hand still tingled where Micah had held it. Her lips still felt warm where his had touched. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was just part of the ceremony. But her body didn't believe her. When they reached the house, Micah dismounted and came around to help her down. His hands spanned her waist again, and this time, she felt the heat of them even through the wool dress. Her feet touched the ground, but he didn't let go immediately. Willa looked up and found him staring at her, his expression raw and uncertain. Thank you. She wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. All of it, maybe. He released her and stepped back. I'll take the certificate to the bank. That should stop the foreclosure. Willa nodded. I need to check the fence line in the north pasture. One of the posts is loose. He hesitated. I can do that. You've done enough. She said it soft but firm. Micah's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He remounted and rode toward town. Willa watched him go, then went into the house and changed into her work clothes. The blue dress went back on its peg, smelling faintly of candle wax and regret. She grabbed her father's old hat and headed for the barn. The fence work took most of the afternoon. Willa dug out the loose post, reset it deeper, and tamped the earth down hard. Her hands blistered inside the gloves. Her back ached. She welcomed the pain. It gave her something to focus on, besides the fact that she was now married to a man she'd known for less than a day total. A man who was being hunted by killers, and who would leave as soon as it was safe. She hammered the last nail and stood back, wiping sweat from her forehead. The fence was solid again. If only everything else could be fixed so easily. She heard the horse before she saw it. Not Micah's gray, but a different animal. A big black gelding moving fast. Willa turned and shaded her eyes. The rider was a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and a flat-brimmed hat. He reined in 20 feet away and dismounted. Willa's hand went to the knife at her belt. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for a man. Deputy by the name of Turner." Willa's blood went cold. She kept her face blank. "Don't know him." The man's smile widened. "That's funny, because I just came from town, and the bank clerk told me Deputy Turner got married this morning. To a woman named Willa Sinclair, owner of Bluebird Ranch." Willa's fingers tightened on the knife handle. "Who are you?" The man tipped his hat. "Name's Wade. I work for a man named Coltrane. You might have heard of him." Willa's stomach dropped. She had. Micah had told her. The man who'd killed a rancher in Dodge City. The man whose trial was 3 weeks away. Wade continued, his voice pleasant and deadly. "Coltrane's real interested in making sure Deputy Turner doesn't make it to that trial. Real interested. So interested he's offering $1,000 to anyone who brings him Turner's body." Willa forced herself to breathe. "I married a deputy. I didn't marry his past." Wade laughed. "That's sweet. But here's the thing. If Turner's got a wife, he's got a reason to stay put. And if he stays put, we know where to find him." She pulled the knife, held it low, and ready. "Get off my land." Wade's hand moved to his gun belt, then stopped. He glanced past her shoulder. Willa didn't turn. She knew what he'd seen. Micah, riding in from the south, rifle across his saddle. Wade's smile faded. "This ain't over, Mrs. Turner." He remounted and spurred the black into a gallop, heading east toward the road. Willa's legs shook. She sank down onto the fence rail, knife still clenched in her fist. Micah reached her and dismounted in one smooth motion. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head. "He knows. He knows we're married. He knows you're here." Micah's face went hard as stone. "Wade." She nodded. "He said Coltrane's offering $1,000. Micah swore under his breath and scanned the horizon. "We need to get you inside. Now." He pulled her to her feet, grabbed the bay's reins, and led both horses back toward the ranch at a fast walk. Willa's mind raced. If Wade knew, others would know soon. Coltrane's men would come. They'd come here, to Bluebird Ranch, because Micah had tied himself to this place by marrying her. She thought the marriage would save the ranch. Instead, she just made it a target. They reached the house, and Micah tied the horse's clothes within easy reach. Inside, he moved through the rooms, checking windows, bolting doors. Willa stood in the kitchen watching him. "This is my fault." He stopped, turned. "No. This is Coltrane's fault, and mine for thinking I could hide." She shook her head. "I agreed to the marriage. I brought you here." Micah crossed the room and gripped her shoulders, firm and grounding. "You gave me a chance when I needed one. I'm not letting you pay for that with your life." His eyes burned into hers. "We're going to get through this. Both of us." Willa wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into his strength and let him carry the weight. But she'd been alone too long, had learned too well that depending on someone else was a quick way to get your heart broken. She stepped back, breaking his hold. What do we do? Micah's jaw tightened. We fortify. We wait for Bowman to send help. And if they come before that, then we fight. He said it flat and certain, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Willa looked at him. This man who'd come to take her ranch and ended up standing between her and a killer's hired guns, and felt something crack open inside her chest. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Micah boarded up the lower windows, leaving only narrow gaps to shoot through. Willa loaded every gun in the house. Her father's rifles and shotguns and the old Colt revolver her mother had kept in a drawer. They moved supplies into the center of the house. Water and food and ammunition. As the sun dropped toward the mesa, Micah finally stopped and looked at her. You should eat something. Willa realized she hadn't eaten since dawn. She heated beans and cornbread, and they ate in silence at the kitchen table. The same table where she'd pored over the ledger and found no answers. Full dark came fast. Micah blew out the lamps and they sat in the dim glow of the banked stove, waiting. Willa's nerves stretched tight. Every sound made her jump. The creak of the house settling, the wind rattling a loose board, the distant call of an owl. Micah sat by the front window, rifle in hand, his body a dark silhouette against the faint starlight. Willa moved to sit beside him. Do you think they'll come tonight? He didn't look away from the window. If Wade rode straight back to wherever Coltrane's camped, they could be here by midnight. She nodded and picked up the shotgun she'd set by the door. Hours passed. Willa's eyes burned from staring into the dark. Her hands cramped around the shotgun. She was about to suggest they take turns sleeping when Micah stiffened. Horses. Willa's heart slammed against her ribs. She moved to the side window, peered through the narrow gap. 4 riders, coming slow and careful up the drive. No torches, no noise, just the soft creak of leather and the muffled thud of hooves on packed earth. Micah's voice was barely a whisper. Stay low. Don't shoot unless I do. She nodded, throat too tight to speak. The riders stopped 50 yards out. Willa could just make out their shapes, dark against the darker prairie. One of them called out, voice carrying clear and cold. Turner, we know you're in there. Send out the woman, and we'll let you live. Micah didn't answer. Willa saw his finger rest on the trigger guard, patient and ready. The voice came again. We ain't got all night, deputy. You got 10 seconds to decide. 10. Willa's pulse roared in her ears. 9. Micah shifted his weight, sighting down the barrel. 8. She tasted copper. 7. The night exploded. Bullets punched through the boarded windows, thudded into the walls. Willa dropped flat and covered her head as splinters rained down. Micah fired twice, fast and controlled. One of the riders yelled and fell. The others scattered, circling the house. Micah moved to the back window, fired again. Willa crawled to the side, found a gap in the boards, and thrust the shotgun barrel through. She saw movement, squeezed both triggers. The recoil slammed her shoulder. Someone screamed. She ducked back, hands shaking as she fumbled for more shells. The gunfire paused. Willa's ears rang. She could hear her own breath, ragged and fast. Micah reloaded, his movements smooth and automatic. You hit? She shook her head. You? I'm fine. A voice outside, rough and angry. Burn them out. Willa's stomach dropped. Micah swore and moved to the front window. She smelled it before she saw it. Smoke. Thick and acrid, pouring under the back door. They'd set the barn on fire. The wind was pushing the smoke toward the house. In minutes, they'd be choking. In an hour, the house would be an inferno. Micah grabbed her arm. We have to go. Now. Willa's mind raced. The horses were tied out front. Exposed. If they ran for them, they'd be shot down in seconds. Micah seemed to read her thoughts. The storm cellar. Back door. We can get to it if we move fast. Willa nodded. She grabbed a satchel, shoved in ammunition and the money from the lockbox. Micah took the rifles. They moved to the back door. He looked at her, his face grim. When I open this, run straight for the cellar. Don't stop. Don't look back. If I fall, you keep going. She wanted to argue. There was no time. Ready? She nodded. He threw the door open. They ran. Smoke choked her. Heat seared her back. Willa heard shouting, heard gunfire crack behind them. She didn't stop. The cellar door was 10 feet away, then 5. Micah reached it first, hauled it open. Willa dove through. He followed and slammed the door shut, dropping the bar across it. Darkness swallowed them. Willa collapsed on the packed earth floor, coughing, lungs burning. Micah's hand found her shoulder. You all right? She managed a nod he couldn't see. Yes. Above them, footsteps pounded. Voices shouted. Someone tried the cellar door, rattled it hard. It held. They waited in the dark, pressed against the cold earth wall. Willa could hear the fire roaring above them, hear timbers cracking and falling. Her home was burning. Everything her parents had built, everything she'd fought to save, was turning to ash. She wanted to scream. She wanted to weep. Instead, she sat in the dark and listened to Micah breathe beside her. Steady and calm, and let that be enough. Hours passed. The sounds faded. The cellar grew colder. Finally, Micah stirred. I think they're gone. Willa didn't move. What if they're waiting? Then we'll deal with it. But we can't stay here. She knew he was right. He eased the bar up, pushed the door open an inch. Cold air and the smell of smoke poured in. He pushed it wider, looked out. Clear. They climbed out into the pre-dawn gray. Willa stood and stared at what was left. The barn was gone, just a skeleton of blackened beams. The house was a smoking ruin. Walls collapsed, roof caved in. The corrals were burned. The horses were gone. Bluebird Ranch was gone. She felt Micah's hand close around hers, warm and solid. I'm sorry. She couldn't speak. She just held on and watched the smoke rise into the pale sky. They walked toward the road as the sun rose, covered in soot and ash. Willa's legs shook with exhaustion. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't care. Micah kept his rifle ready, scanning the horizon. A mile down the road, they saw riders coming. Willa tensed. Micah raised the rifle, then lowered it. Sheriff Bowman. The old man rode up with 3 deputies, his face grim. Turner, Miss Sinclair, He paused. Mrs. Turner, I mean. We saw the smoke. Micah's jaw was tight. Coltrane's men. 4 of them. They burned us out. Bowman swore. I got word this morning that Coltrane escaped custody in Dodge. Trial's off. He's coming here. Willa felt the last of her strength drain away. Micah's hand tightened on hers. Where is he? Bowman pointed west. Holed up in the old Garrett place about 10 miles out. He's got maybe a dozen men with him. We can't take him without more help. I sent for the marshal, but he won't be here for 2 days. Micah's voice was flat. We don't have 2 days. Bowman looked at him, measuring. What are you thinking? Micah glanced at Willa, then back at the sheriff. I'm thinking I'm done running. I'm going to finish this. Now. Willa's heart stopped. No. Micah turned to her. This is the only way. If Coltrane stays free, he'll keep coming. He'll kill me. He'll kill you. He'll burn every place I've ever been until there's nothing left. She shook her head. You can't take on a dozen men. I'm not planning to. He looked at Bowman. If I can get inside, get close to Coltrane, can you and your men create a distraction? Bowman hesitated, then nodded slowly. We can make some noise. Might give you a chance. Micah turned back to Willa. I need you to stay here. Stay with the sheriff. No. Her voice was hoarse but firm. I'm coming with you. Micah's expression turned thunderous. Willa, this isn't... She cut him off. You married me to save my ranch. It's gone. The only thing left is you. I'm not letting you ride into that alone. He stared at her, and she saw the moment he realized she meant it, that she would follow him no matter what he said. His hand came up, cupped her soot-streaked face. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. She almost smiled. I know. He leaned his forehead against hers, just for a moment. All right, but you do exactly what I say. When I say it. She nodded. I will. They rode west with Bowman and his men. 2 to a horse, since Willa and Micah had none. The sun climbed higher, turning the prairie gold and merciless. Willa rode behind Micah, her arms around his waist, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She thought about the first time she'd seen him, bleeding and desperate in her storm shelter. She thought about the way he'd looked at her in the rain when he delivered the foreclosure notice. She thought about his hands holding hers in the church, the brief press of his lips, the way he'd said her name like it mattered. She didn't know when she'd stopped thinking of this as a business arrangement. Maybe it had never been one at all. They stopped on a ridge overlooking the Garrett place. It was an old homestead, abandoned for years, walls crumbling and roof sagging. But there were horses in the corral and smoke rising from the chimney. Bowman pointed. Coltrane's in there. Probably in the main room. There's a back door, but it'll be guarded. Micah studied the layout. If you hit the front hard, make them think you're coming through, I can get in the back. Take out the guard and go for Coltrane before they realize what's happening. Bowman nodded. What about her? Micah looked at Willa. She stays here, on the ridge, out of range. Willa started to protest, but he turned and took her face in both hands. Please, let me do this knowing you're safe. She wanted to argue. She wanted to ride down there with him and make sure he came back. But she saw the fear in his eyes, the raw, desperate need for her to be all right. and she couldn't fight it. All right. His shoulders sagged with relief. He kissed her then, hard and fierce. A kiss that tasted like smoke and desperation, and something that might have been love if they'd had more time. Then, he let her go, took a rifle from one of the deputies, and started down the ridge on foot. Willa watched him move, low and fast, using the scrub and rocks for cover. Bowman looked at her. He's a good man. I hope so. She said it quiet, barely a whisper. Because if he dies down there, I don't know what I'll do. Bowman gave Micah 5 minutes, then signaled his men. They rode down the front side of the ridge, firing as they came. The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted from the house, bullets kicking up dust. Willa gripped the reins of the horse she'd been left with and forced herself to stay put. She couldn't see Micah. He'd disappeared into the scrub near the back of the house. She counted breaths. 30, 60, 90. The gunfire intensified. One of Bowman's men went down, clutching his leg. Another's horse reared and bolted. Willa's nails dug into her palms. Then she heard it. A single shot, different from the others. Sharper, closer, from inside the house. The gunfire from the windows faltered, stopped. Silence stretched, brittle and terrible. Willa couldn't breathe. Then the back door opened, and Micah stepped out, rifle in hand, his face grim. Bowman rode forward. Turner? Micah nodded once. It's done. Coltrane's dead. The rest of them are surrendering. Willa didn't remember sliding off the horse. She didn't remember running. She just found herself in front of Micah, hands on his chest, checking for blood, for wounds, for any sign that he was hurt. He caught her wrists, held them gently. I'm all right. She looked up at him, saw the exhaustion and relief in his eyes, and something inside her broke open. I thought I'd lost you. His thumb brushed her cheek. You didn't. You won't. She shook her head. You can't promise that. He smiled, small and sad. No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to make sure it doesn't happen. She leaned into him and let him hold her, while Bowman and his men rounded up Coltrane's men and tied them for transport. The sun was high now, burning away the last of the morning cold. Willa closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of smoke and leather, and the man who'd somehow become more than a means to save her ranch. They rode back to Cedar Mesa that afternoon. Willa sat in front of Micah this time, leaning back against his chest, his arms around her as he held the reins. She felt safe for the first time in days, maybe longer. When they reached town, people came out to stare. The story had already spread. Deputy Turner had killed Coltrane. The outlaw threat was over. Willa and Micah were heroes, or fools, depending on who you asked. Mary Callahan stood on the church steps, her face pinched and disapproving. Willa ignored her. She was done caring what the town thought. Bowman offered them a room at the boarding house until they could figure out what came next. Willa accepted because she had nowhere else to go. The room was small and plain, with a single bed and a washstand and a window that looked out over the main street. Micah set the rifle in the corner and turned to her. Willa, I. She kissed him before he could finish. Slow and deliberate, her hands fisted in his vest. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, kissing her back like she was air and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. This wasn't supposed to happen. She smiled. I know. Does it change things? She thought about it. The ranch was gone. The foreclosure didn't matter anymore. The marriage had served its purpose. They could dissolve it now, walk away, go back to being strangers. Or they could choose something else. It changes everything. He pulled back just enough to see her face. What do you want? She looked at him, this man who'd come to take her home and ended up giving her a reason to build a new one. I want you. Not because of a business arrangement. Not because of a debt. I want you because you're stubborn and loyal, and you kissed me like I mattered. His eyes darkened. You do matter, more than you know. Then stay. Not for 30 days. Not until it's convenient. Stay because you want to. He cupped her face, his touch gentle and sure. I want to. I want to stay and help you rebuild. I want to wake up next to you every morning and argue about fence posts, and listen to you tell me I'm doing it wrong. I want all of it, Willa. If you'll have me. She kissed him again, slower this time, tasting the promise in it. I'll have you. They spent the evening planning. The ranch would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. It would take money they didn't have, and time they'd have to steal from other work. But Bowman offered Micah a permanent deputy post, with a decent wage, and Willa could go back to keeping books for the town merchants. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And they'd have each other. That counted for more than Willa had ever thought possible. 3 weeks later, they rode out to Bluebird Ranch. The ashes had cooled. The wind had scattered the worst of the debris. Willa stood in the middle of what had been her home and felt Micah's hand slip into hers. We'll build it back. Better than before. She looked at the land, the rolling prairie, and the distant mesa, and the sky stretching forever. Her parents were gone. The house was gone. But the land was still here. And so was she. And so was Micah. That was enough. More than enough. We will. She turned to him. Together. He smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him. Together. They started with the barn. Micah framed the walls while Willa measured and marked. The neighboring ranchers, the same ones who'd watched the foreclosure with pity and hadn't offered loans, came to help. They brought lumber and nails and labor, and they didn't ask questions. Maybe they felt guilty. Maybe they respected what Micah and Willa had done, taking on Coltrane and his men. Maybe they just liked a good love story. Willa didn't care. She took the help and thanked them, and worked until her hands blistered and her back screamed. At night, she and Micah would collapse in the boarding house room, too tired to do more than hold each other. But they were building something real, something that mattered. The barn went up in 2 weeks. The house took longer. They built it smaller this time, just 2 rooms and a loft, but solid and tight against the weather. Willa chose the spot carefully, a little south of where the old house had stood, with a better view of the mesa. Micah built her a wide porch where she could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. When the roof was done and the windows set, they moved in with nothing but a bedroll and a cast iron skillet. That first night, they lay on the floor, and looked up at the raw beams and laughed until they couldn't breathe. It wasn't much. It was everything. Spring came. Willa planted a garden behind the house. Vegetables and herbs, and a row of flowers her mother would have loved. Micah bought 3 horses from a breeder in Abilene. Good sturdy animals that didn't spook easy. They started small, taking in other people's horses to board and train. It was slow work, but steady. The debt to the bank was still there, but the new terms gave them 5 years to pay, and with both of them working, it felt possible. More than possible. Willa kept the books at night by lamplight, while Micah mended tack and oiled saddles. Sometimes he'd look up and catch her watching him, and he'd smile, and she'd feel her heart turn over. The town social came in June. Willa hadn't planned to go. She still remembered Mary Callahan's pinched face, the gossip that had followed their hasty marriage. But Micah asked her, formal and sweet, and she couldn't say no. She wore the blue dress, the one from the funeral and the wedding, and Micah wore a clean shirt and his good vest. They walked into the church hall, and every head turned. Willa lifted her chin and kept her hand in Micah's. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She knew what she had, and it was worth more than their approval. The music started. Micah led her onto the floor. Willa had never been much of a dancer, but he was patient, guiding her through the steps, his hand warm on her waist. They turned and swayed, and gradually the stares faded as other couples joined them. Mary Callahan watched from the edge, her expression unreadable. Willa met her eyes and smiled. Not a challenge, not a victory. Just a woman who'd found something real and wasn't going to apologize for it. Mary looked away first. That night, they walked home under the stars, the music still ringing in Willa's ears. The house was dark when they arrived, just a small shape against the huge sky. Micah lit the lamp, and they sat on the porch, not ready to go inside yet. Willa leaned against his shoulder. Do you ever regret it? Coming here? Staying? He was quiet for a moment. No, not even for a second. She turned to look at him. Even though you lost your chance to testify? Even though Coltrane's dead and the trial never happened? He brushed a strand of hair from her face. That trial would have made me a witness. This made me a husband. I know which one I'd choose every time. She kissed him, soft and lingering. I love you. She hadn't said it before, hadn't let herself. But it was true, and she was done hiding from true things. Micah's arms tightened around her. I love you too. I think I have since the night you let me into your storm shelter and didn't ask what I'd done. Willa laughed softly. I knew what you'd done. You had guilty written all over you. He grinned. And you helped me anyway. That's when I knew you were dangerous. She raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? To my heart. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Willa let herself fall into it, into him, into the life they were building one stubborn day at a time. Summer turned to fall. The garden flourished. The horses thrived. Willa's ledger showed small but steady profits. They paid down part of the debt, enough to make the bank manager nod with grudging respect. Micah kept his deputy badge but spent most of his time at the ranch, riding fence lines and training young horses, and fixing the 100 small things that always needed fixing. Willa kept books for 3 merchants in town and started teaching reading to the children on Sunday afternoons. It was a good life, a quiet life. Nothing like the wild, desperate days when they'd first married. But Willa wouldn't trade it for anything. One evening in October, she stood on the porch and watched the sunset paint the mesa gold and crimson. Micah came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" She leaned back against him. "That I almost lost all of this. That I almost let fear and pride keep me from asking for help." He rested his chin on her head. "You didn't lose it. You fought for it. We fought for it." She turned in his arms. "Together. Always." He smiled. "Always." They stood there as the light faded and the stars came out, one by one. Willa thought about her parents, about how they'd built Bluebird Ranch with nothing but hope and hard work. She thought about the foreclosure notice, the fire, the desperate flight through the smoke. She thought about Micah's hands holding hers in the church, the way he'd kissed her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. She thought about the life they'd built from ash and stubbornness and love that had snuck up on them when they weren't looking. It wasn't the life she planned. It was better. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of prairie grass and distant rain. Micah pulled her closer. Storm coming. Willa smiled against his chest. "Let it come. We'll weather it. Just like they'd weathered everything else. Together, stubborn and unbreakable. In the house they'd built on land that had tried to destroy them.